Hello, everyone. Welcome to SharePoint Power Hour, or actually today it might be more like SharePoint Power half hour. But we'll see what we can do. My name is Joelle Farley, and if you've watched any of these sessions before, you have probably seen my face as well as the faces of my coworkers here. A lot of our team, we do have a bit of a skeleton crew today. Uh, so a lot of our team is actually at SP TechCon. So if you are attending that or have attended that, then definitely stop by and see Laura and a few other people from the Rackspace team. They're all attending this week. I am actually going to be talking about just a quick demo on how to use a SharePoint Designer workflow, specifically in SharePoint 2013, to create a subsite. So actually letting the workflow pull information from a list and then create a subsite. But before I do so, I want to go ahead and let my coworkers here introduce themselves. So go ahead, Ryan, I'll let you go first, since you're the first one I see.
Cool. Alrighty. Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan Keller. I am the branding guy in the SharePoint services team here at Rackspace. Been doing that for about 3.5 or so years now, and looking forward to seeing this session. It should be fairly interesting. So.
All right.
Hey, everyone. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off.
Nope, go ahead.
Hey, everyone. My name is Tavis Lovell, and I am a business intelligence developer on the business solutions team, so dealing with all things dashboarding and reporting inside of SharePoint and a little SQL Server work as well.
Awesome. All right. All right, well, let me just get right into it. If you have any questions, as always, there is a Q&A feature. If you're watching it on YouTube, you'll see the Q&A button on the video. If you're on Google+, you'll see it there. Feel free to enter any questions or comments that you have, and we'll see those as we go through. And like I said, today's a shorter session, so if you have questions that are not at all related to what I'm presenting about, feel free to put them in there. If it's something that we can answer today, we definitely will. If not, we'll take it on to next week and have an answer for you. So feel free to do that. All right, let me go ahead and get my screen sharing going here, and we'll start walking through this process. All right. Ryan or Tavis, can you just make sure that you guys can see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great. All right, so I am actually going to start off with just a simple list inside of a SharePoint site. So I'm actually using Office 365, so this is something that you can do in Office 365 or on-prem. It doesn't matter, you can do that in either place. And so what I've started off with here is something really basic. So I have a list inside of SharePoint. And the idea is that users are going to enter information into this list, and then what will happen is a workflow will run and create a subsite from the information that they're entering here. Obviously, if I needed it to go through an approval, I could add an approval functionality in there somewhere. But for right now, we're just going to keep it basic. They enter information here, and it creates a subsite. So you can imagine a business use for this is if you needed to create project sites. So let's say somebody wanted to enter a new project, they needed a project site, but they don't they may not have the training and or the permission to actually create a subsite, or maybe you don't want them to be able to do that. So here they would be able to enter a new project, and then essentially you could have your workflow run and create the subsite for them. So that's kind of the idea with this. So that's why we're doing it this way. All right, so the list is very simple. I have a couple of different columns, so I'll show you what I have going on here. So in my list, I have my title, which I'm going to use for the actual title of my site. I have web URL. Now, all I have to do here is whatever comes after the last. It's basically going to be the end of the URL, so whatever comes at the end of the URL, and I'll show you that as we go through. That's what you're going to put into this field. And then we also have web description here. So web description is going to be the actual description for the site. And then you can have a couple of other things. So let's say if you wanted to have it pull a specific template. So like if you maybe depending on what item they're entering or what site they're wanting to create, they may need a different template to be created. So you can either set the template right in the workflow, or you can actually, have a column in your library or in your list that allows them to enter the template. So it could be something like team site or project template, or maybe even something custom if you wanted something custom to be used. So you can pretty much enter any of that stuff inside of your list here, and so then your users can fill it out, and then the workflow, as you'll see, will pull from that information to be able to create the subsite. So I'll come back to this list in a little while because I'm going to test this out so you guys can see it. But as you can see right now, we have title, web URL, and web description are the only ones I'm using. This new subsite is the actual workflow, which I've already published. So I'll show you that in a minute. So to get started, I've already built this because it does have quite a few steps to it. So I went ahead and built it, but I'm going to go ahead and walk through each of the things I created so that you can get a good idea of how to do this. And there is actually, if you go out and you Google creating a subsite with a SharePoint 2013 workflow, there are quite a few articles out there on how to do this. So definitely feel free to do that to get some more information if you need it. So I've opened up SharePoint Designer. I've logged into my my SharePoint online site. So I have logged into that here. And then I've gone to Workflows. And the workflow that I've created is called, or that I'm using is called New Subsite, right here. And I've already created it. And the way that I created it is I created a list workflow, and I just created it off of my Create Subsite list. So that list I was just showing you is called Create Subsite, so I just created the workflow off of that. Let me go ahead and open it up. This workflow that I created, as you can see, so I called it New Subsite. It's based off of that Create Subsite list. This workflow is going to can be manually started. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to allow it to, as soon as an item's created in my list, I want it to kick off. So I've marked that as well. So that now it can be manually started, or the workflow can be started automatically when an item is created. Depending on the process that you have in place, you may not want to allow them to manually start it. So you may want to just leave the start when an item is created checked. So go ahead and edit the workflow. All right, so as I mentioned, I've kind of already built this out, but I wanted to go through and kind of talk through the different steps that you'll need to set up or put into place as you build out your workflow. So there's a couple of different things to know. This is definitely a little bit more complicated than your average workflow because we're going to work with a web service. We're going to build a dictionary, and we're going to do a couple of other things inside of this. We're going to use an app step, which may be new to some of you. So we're going to talk through that. So the first thing that I did is I went through and I created a bunch of variables. And these variables, a lot of these variables, they do need to have specific names. So the naming convention needs to be exactly what you see in my workflow. So one of the very first variables you'll see up here is this request URL. So it's a request with no space and then URL. So I created that variable, and to that variable, I have pointed to the API that will allow me to create a subsite, basically. And so the way that looks, let me open it up here. So what I have here, this is the URL to my site, so the SharePoint.com, and then the slash, everything that's after this underscore API /web info /add, this part right here is what you would append to the end of your URL. Because this is going to get me to the API that's going to allow me to be able to create a subsite, to make that call that we're going to do a little bit later. So you want to set that up first so that this variable request URL will be pointed to the right place. So once again, I'll put that up on the screen so you can see it. It's my URL with the underscore API /web info /add there. And then what I did is I created a couple more variables. So I have a variable called title. This variable is pointing to, in my list, the column called title. So I just went ahead and I set this to current item and then title. And the way that you create a variable, if you're new to workflows, the way that you create a variable, it's an action, and then you set workflow variable. So that would be the action that you would add to do this. And then the next variable that I have is description. and then that is pointing to the in the list where I have the web description. Let me show you that. Right here where I have web description, that's what it's pointing to. And then site URL, that's where I have the URLs, that's pointing to web URL. And then site template, I'm pointing that to just STS. And this is where I was saying that you could either hard code, kind of quote unquote hard code that into your workflow. So I'm just saying this is STS's team site. So I'm just saying automatically, no matter what site that they're adding, it's always going to be a team site. Or you can set this variable like I did above, where you're actually pointing it to something that they're putting into the list. So maybe in the list they're actually going to say, you know, what, like you make it a drop-down list or something, like whatever the template that you want them to be able to create is, then you could do that there. So I set up these variables. So I have the request URL, I have title, description, site URL, and site template. And then the next step, once I have set all my variables up, is I have to build a dictionary, which is a new action that you'll see inside of SharePoint 2013. It's called Build Dictionary. So I'm going to have to build a dictionary that's going to allow me to be able to work with this web service, calling this web service a little bit later on. So to build the dictionary, I need a couple of things. The first one I'm going to do, I'm going to have the dictionary is going to have an output. They're going to have output variables for each one of these dictionaries I create. The first one is request headers, so the headers for the request I'm going to make. The second one is metadata, all lowercase. Third one is parameters here. And then the fourth one is request dictionary. So those are the four, because basically when you add a dictionary action, let me add one really quick. You'll see that right here it says build this dictionary output to, and it just defaults to this variable dictionary. This is where you would want to come in, create a new variable, and then give it one of these names: request headers, metadata, parameters, request dictionary. So go ahead and delete that, get it out of the way. And then what you do is you click here. So you're going to build the dictionary, so you're going to click here. And then this is where a lot of these names that we're using and this information that we're putting in here, this has to be exactly as you're seeing me put it in here. It's not going to be specific to your site or anything like that. It's actually going to be specific to the actual process of using this web service down below. So for request headers, which is the first one, the first thing that I'm going to add, so I'm going to modify this so you can actually see it. It's going to be this accept. And then with the type of string. And then here I'm calling application / JSON semicolon OData equals verbose. So that's what that says there. And like I said, there's a lot of blogs that have been written on this, so if you need to actually see this in step-by-step order. So I enter that in, so that's the accept value. And then here I'm going to modify this, and then this is content / type, string, and then we have that same thing here. The application / JSON semicolon OData equals verbose. So I add both of those to my request header. So this is going to give me my request headers for when I get down into the actual request down here. So I add both of those, and then I move down to variable metadata. So this will be the next one. So I click on this. And then all I did here is I'm adding the type for the metadata. The type, which is a string, is going to be sp.webinfo creation. So type string sp.webinfo creation. So that's what I'm getting to that, pulling that information in. And then parameters, this is where I'm actually going to pull in all of the stuff that I was setting up here. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. So right here, the very first one, I'm actually going to pull in the metadata dictionary that I created. Let me modify this. So right here, this is a trick. This is one that like completely threw me off. And it doesn't say it anywhere. But this right here before metadata, this is actually 2 underscores. So of course, like if you're probably paying pretty close attention, you might notice that. But if not, if you're kind of glancing over it, it may be easy to miss. But it's actually 2 underscores before metadata. And then you're pulling in variable metadata, which is the dictionary that you just created. So you're just pulling that in. So as you can see, workflow variables and parameters, and then variable metadata. Oops, and that should be dictionary. Here, let me just cancel. There we go. And then what we're doing for the rest of this, like I said, this is where we're actually going to pull in this information that we've set up here. So the URL, which is the value, or which is the name, we're pulling in URL and then variable site URL. That's the variable that we created up here. So we pull that in. And then title, same thing, title, string, variable title, whatever we want the title of our site to be. Description, same thing, the description we're pulling in here. Language, this is just setting the language of your subsite that you want to create. So this one's going to be 1033 for English. So we just set that there. And those values I think you can pretty much, if you go on to TechNet, you can find the other values there. Web template, this is where I'm going to point to if I'm setting that template up here. So the web template is going to be variable site template. And then finally, use unique permissions. So this is pretty important. Do you want to use unique permissions? So the subsite's going to have its own, it's going to break inheritance from its parent and just have its own permission. Then you could set the value to no, or if the type is Boolean and then the value to no. Or if you want it to, or you would set it to yes, sorry. If you want it to have, it wanted to inherit from its parent, then you could set the value to no. So that's use unique permissions, and that's the final parameter here. So you have double underscore metadata, URL, title, description, language, web template, and use unique permissions. And those are the items that you're setting that they need to be, the actual name of them needs to be exact on those. So we've set that. So now the request dictionary. We're going to go ahead here, and then we're just going to set the parameters for the request dictionary. So it needs to have parameters. It's just going to point to the variable parameters, which is that last dictionary that we created here. So now we've set all of those up. We've built our dictionary. So now we're ready to actually make the call to the web service that will use all of this information to create the subsite. In order to do this, because this is going to take something that it's going to take elevated permissions to be able to create a subsite, we're going to use an app step. So to use an app step, it's once you kind of go and activate app steps and add them, which I'm going to walk you through how to do that. It's as simple as just using the app step up here in the top of my workflow. So where I have app step, I added that and then added actions to it. But before I can do that, because what you may notice is when you're using SharePoint Designer for 2013, this may be grayed out. So in order to get to the point where you can use an app step in your workflow, you have to set it up. So we're going to go back over to my site. And I'm going to go to Site Settings, and then Manage Site Features. And then at the very end, there's Workflows can use app permissions. This feature needs to be activated. Now for me, I've already done this, so it's activated. But this is where you would click Activate, and then this feature would be available. But that's not it, unfortunately. Well, we also, once we have set it up to use workflows to use app permissions, we have to actually give the app step the permission to be able to be used. It's basically to be able to be used for this specific workflow. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to Site Settings, and we're going to go to, I think it's Site App Permissions. I'm not mistaken. Yep. Here's Workflow. So we want to be able to grant this workflow access. So we're going to, when we see Workflow here, what we're going to do is we're going to grab the GUID that's between the pipe here, this last pipe, and then the @ sign. So I'm just basically going to copy this right here. Hopefully you can see that. So after the last pipe and before the @ sign. I'm just going to copy that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, now this is really tricky, and I don't know why they haven't made this part easier. Hopefully they will soon. But what we need to do is we need to go to the app permission page to be able to set this. Now, that's not anywhere that we could easily get to. It's not in site settings. We actually have to append certain some values after our URL to be able to get to that. And let me go ahead and just copy this, and then I'll show you what it is. So basically what it is it's our URL slash underscore layout slash 15 slash app inv.aspx. That's where we have to go right there. So we go to that. We're going to paste in that value that I just, oops, of course I just did that. Let me duplicate this. I forgot that I copied the, there we go. All right. So we're going to paste that in here and do a lookup. It pulls in what we need. And then the permission request that we have to put in, I'm going to copy this and then I'm going to zoom in so you can see this. This will be the same no matter what site that you're using. It's basically giving the workflow full control so that it can create a subsite. Let's see. Let me zoom in a little bit. And I'll leave that up there just for a second so anybody who needs to pause this to pull that can see it. So basically what that's doing is that's just giving the workflow the full control permission. And you only have to do this once. Once you do this, then the workflow will always have full control, and then you'll be able to use app steps to do different things. So zoom back out. And then I would click create and I'd be done. I've already done this, so I'm not going to do it again, but if I click create, then it would be finished. And then once I do that, I'm ready to go back to my workflow. Add my app step. App step, you might have to refresh or open and close SharePoint Designer, but then app step would be available. You add that. And then we're going to put some actions inside of this. So what I did, the only action that you technically need to have is this call variable request URL here. But what I did is I actually, I wanted to make sure as I'm running through this process, I wanted to make sure that I could actually get the right results. And I wanted to, as I'm testing, I wanted to make sure that I'm seeing what I need to see. So what I did is before I ran the call, I logged the request URL, which is that variable we set at the top that to point to the API. So I logged that to my workflow history list, which is just your action log to history list. So I logged just that variable to the history list so that I could see what the URL is before I make the call. And then I make the call. So this is actually another action. It is call HTTP web service. And then what I did is I have set the call will be the variable request URL, which is that very first variable we set. And it's going to be HTTP post. There's a couple options here, but you want post. And I click OK. And then the web service with the request dictionary. So the request dictionary is, remember, where we set all the parameters up. So the request dictionary is what it's going to pull to get all the parameters together. So it knows exactly how to create the subsite. So then I just set that to variable request dictionary. The response content to variable response content, that's just something that you can create. Response headers to response headers, that's actually just part of it. Part of the call. And then response status code to variable response code. A lot of those are going to be things that you'll see even when you're using the call web service action. A lot of those are going to be set for you. And then once it's finished here, you can log the response code to your workflow history list as well, and then that way you can see exactly what the response was. So whether or not if it failed, like let's say if you run this workflow, it doesn't work, and you want to see where it failed, this is kind of just ways that you can easily see, because what we'll tell you in the response code is that it failed and why it failed. Could be, permission issues, maybe the app step wasn't done right, or something similar. And then finally, what I have it doing here is I have it emailing me, and I think I just have it emailing me the response content. Yeah, so I have it emailing me more of the response information. So I want to see the total response from the call that I made. And then finally, it just ends the workflow. Now, obviously, like I said, you could put an approval in here somewhere if you want the site to get approved before it gets created. You can build that into your workflow as well. So once I'm finished here, I've gone through this whole thing. So once I'm finished, I can go ahead and I can save and publish this to my site. And then we're ready to go try it out. So I'm going to close out of here because I didn't want to make any changes. I'm going to go back to my site. And as always with workflows, let's pray that it works. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add a new item. And I'm going to call this Power Hour. The description is, this is a test site for my demo. And save. And because it's Office 365, we're going to give it a second for that workflow to start. So I'm going to give it a second. It says stage 1. So it looks we got as far as it created, it sent the request URL, so I could see that. So let's see. All right, and it seems that the response code that I wrote to the workflow history list is saying okay. So let me go check my site contents, because remember I created a site called Power Hour, so I'm going to go to Site Contents. I'm going to scroll down, and then here I have a new subsite called Power Hour. So I click on that, and there's my subsite. So I was able to create that with a workflow. So now anytime anybody comes in and fills that out, it'll create a site for them. And we shouldn't be using unique permissions. We should be inheriting. So let's check that. Yep, so we're inheriting. So that's good. And then let's check my description. Make sure that went to the right place. Yep, there's my description. So as you can see, I was able to create that there. And I just got an email with the full response from the call that I made to create this. Let me go back up here. Let me pull this out. So this is that full response. This is what it sends. As you can see, it's telling me it made the call, created that. The description is this. The time, the URL, the server relative URL, the title, the template, etc. So I can see that what the full call was that was made. So it just kind of helped me troubleshoot if I needed to. All right. That's all that I have. Are there any questions? If you have any questions on that or anything else, feel free to go ahead and stick those into the chat.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That is cool.
Yeah, it helps. It takes a little bit of. It's obviously not completely like, point and click, because it does take a little knowledge of how to build your dictionary and stuff, but it is actually a really nice out-of-the-box feature, instead of having to build something custom to do that.
There's a good question in the question box there. Do you have that open, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, it says, can you have the workflow create the subsite with certain site features turned on by default, i.e. server publishing? I was thinking about that just recently with this process, and I bet that there is a way, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'm not sure if the web service that we're using to do this from within the workflow will point to the features or not. But I'm sure there's a way you could do that with like a custom workflow. I'd have to look and see. I'm not sure. There are other variables, parameters, and stuff that you can create, though. I know that. I was only using a couple of them, like the template and the use unique permissions and stuff. But from what I've seen, there are other ones. I just don't think they aren't specific to like site features, but there are a couple others like a site logo and things like that. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, I'll give a second I'll stop sharing my screen. I will. What do we have coming up, guys? Do you guys know off the top of your head?
I think I have my reporting services class next week. If anybody is looking to get some reporting services training, it's on Thursday, online class. If you go to Google, I don't have the exact URL, but if you go to Google and type in Rackspace reporting services training, you will arrive at that page.
Cool.
As the first result. I don't think I have much else going on.
Awesome. All right. It looks like Power Hour next week. 9/24 is Steven is going to talk more about search. So a couple weeks ago he did a session about search inside of SharePoint 2013. So he's going to kind of continue that next week as well. So if you haven't watched his first session that he did in Power Hour, feel free to go back and watch that before our next week's session. And then I think that we may be having on the 1st of October, which unfortunately I don't think I'll be here for that one because I have a trip that week for a client. But I think we might be having like a user adoption discussion possibly. Just kind of our experiences around what we've seen with user adoption, what's worked, what hasn't worked. So that might be interesting. Not sure if that date's 100% right, but we'll definitely let you guys know. And always check the events page on our Rackspace Google Plus site because that's gonna tell you exactly what we're doing. We set up the events as soon as we know them. All right, yeah, that's all I have. I don't know if I can't think of any interesting news. There's SP TechCon. I'm sure there's some SharePoint Saturdays coming up soon, so check all that stuff out. And then I guess we'll see you next week because I don't see any other questions and I don't have anything else for today. Like I said, today's probably going to be a shorter session anyways with everybody being out.
Well, great presentation. I liked it. Very cool.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. All right, we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
All right.
See you guys later.
See you.